Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's Wednesday. Hope you're doing well, having a good week so far. This first full week of work, of school, of getting back to routine. And we are going to do a couple of Rashis this afternoon, I should say, from the fourth Aliyah. Very interesting Rashis, a little bit hard to decipher. We're going to talk today about the dating of the flood and how the flood receded, the flood waters receded. So in our Aliyah today, the fourth Aliyah, we have the Teva finally coming to rest after all the events of the flood. And the Torah tells us a little bit of a confusing timeline. It says that the Teva stopped floating in the water and came to rest on Hare Ararat, the mountains of Ararat, on the Chodesh HaShvi'i, the 7th month, on the 17th of the month. Despite the fact that the waters receded, they receded to the mountain level on the 17th of the 7th month. However, the waters were still rushing back and forth and still receding until the Chodesh HaAsiri, till the 10th month, Be'echad LaChodesh. On Rosh Chodesh of the 10th month, that's when the waters completely disappeared. And after 40 days after that, then Noach opens up the window of the Teva, whatever that means over here. So all of this dating is very, very confusing. Normally when the Torah says Chodesh Shvi'i, Chodesh HaAsiri, it's talking about the calendar months, and the calendar months are usually counted from Nisan. So Chodesh Shvi'i, for example, would be Chodesh Tishrei, the month that we're still in today for another couple of hours. So according to this, it would have been the 17th of Tishrei, would have been the middle of Sukkot, Chol Moed Sukkot, that the Teva came to finally rest on Harei Ararat, which is not our tradition and not what we believe. So what is this Chodesh HaShvi'i? Chodesh HaAsiri is probably just following from whatever Shvi is, but what is the Chodesh HaShvi? So let's go back a little bit and see the Rashi a little bit earlier in the Parsha. In the beginning of the flood, we learn about the start date of the flood. Now, the start date is going to be important for us to calculate the end date, which is part of our Aliyah today. So the start date, it says here, Bishnat Sheish Me'ot Shana L'Chayei Noach, in 600th year of Noach's life, B'Chodesh HaSheni, in the second month, B'Shivasar Yom LaChodesh, the 17th of that month, Bayom Hazen Ifku Kol Mayos Tohom Rabba Aruos Shamayim Niftachu, all the heavens opened up in the water. Vayegeshem Al Aretz Arba'im Yom Rala. Then 40 days and 40 nights of rain came after that, the 17th of the second month. So the first question we have to ask is, what's the second month over here? So Rashi already quotes the Machlokas Chazal, what the month is over here. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Ze Mar Cheshvan, Rabbi Yeshua Omar Ze Iyar. It's Machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua about whether the second month is Cheshvan or Iyar. This is, of course, related to their Machlokas about what the first month is, which is either Nisan or Tishrei, a Machlokas about when the world was created, in Tishrei or in Nisan. If the world was created in Tishrei, then at this point in the Torah, in Parshas Noach, before we ever get to Shmos, before we ever get to Yetzias Mitzrayim, where the whole calendar count is going to change, all the months are going to be counted from Nisan because of Yetzias Mitzrayim, at this point in history, that hasn't happened yet. And therefore, the count of the months is clearly from creation. The question is, when is creation? Is creation what we call Nisan or what we call Tishrei? Machlokas, Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Yeshua. That machlokas now translates to what the second month is over here. So we seem to paskin like Rabbi Eliezer, at least in this context. Rashi seems to follow Rabbi Eliezer, saying that the world was created in Tishrei. So far in Parshas Noach, we're counting the months based on the creation of the world, and therefore the flood started B'Chodesh HaSheni, the second month, which is Mar Cheshvan. The 17th of Mar Cheshvan is when the flood began, just in a couple of weeks from now. So that is the traditional approach. That's what we, understand as the start of the flood date. Many people commemorate it. Cheshvan, Rosh Cheshvan introduces these events having to do with the flood. Once you know that, you can come to our Aliyah and understand Rashi. So now you come to our Aliyah and read Chodesh HaShvi'i. So that's a little bit confusing. What is the Chodesh HaShvi'i? So if you're counting from Nisan, that would be one thing, which is clearly not, that would be Tishrei, which is clearly not what we're counting from. If you're counting from the creation of the world, when would Chodesh HaShvi'i be? Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevet, Shvat, Adar, Nisan. It would be Nisan, which is not the case over here. Rashi very clearly tells us this Chodesh Shvi'i and Chodesh Asiri is not calendar dates in the larger scheme of the calendar. This is a count of months, not a calendar count, but a count of days, a count of months from the beginning of the flood. So the first dating of the flood in the pasuk I just showed you, Chodesh Hasheni, that's dating from the calendar, and therefore it's talking about Cheshvan. But this Chodesh Shvi'i is Shvi'i from the time of the flood, or from the time where the waters of the flood receded. So over here, when it says Chodesh Shvi'i, it's actually talking about Sivan, Shuv Shvi'i Lekislev, Shebo Pasku Hageshamim. Very complicated. And just to, I'm not even going to pull it through the rest of the psukim. It's very complicated over here, but just so you're following Rashi's train of thought. The flood began in 17th of Cheshvan. 40 days later would be the end of Kislev. That's when the rain stopped, right? So those are the two dates we know from the previous Aliyah, what I just showed you over here, that the flood starts in Chodesh Hasheni and it goes for 40 days. So if it starts from the 17th of Cheshvan, according to Rashi, then it ends in Kislev. The waters stop falling, the rain stops falling in the end of Kislev. Now, if our Aliyah today is talking about how quickly the water receded so that the boat stops floating and lands on the mountains, and then it continues to go down until all the waters recede, that's not talking about from a calendar date from the beginning of creation. And it's not talking about from the beginning of the flood. It's talking about from after the rain stops falling. Then we start a new count of when the water is receding. So Chodesh Shvi'i is counted from Kislev. So Kislev is 1. Kislev would be Tevet, Shvat, Adar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. Sivan, sorry, right? I'm getting confused now. Kislev, Tevet, Shvat, Adar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. Sivan would be the 7th month. So the flood started in Cheshvan. The flood ended in Kislev. The waters receded enough 7 months later in Sivan, on the 17th of Sivan, for the Teva to land on Hare Ararat. That's the sequence of events over here. And then the water kept going, Haloch Lechasor, until the Chodesh HaAsiri, which is also part of that count. And then 40 days later, Noach opens the Teva. So all of this is counted from Kislev. So if Kislev is 7, then Tevet, Shvat, Adar, Tammuz, Elul, you go forward, into the 10th month, and then 40 days beyond that, and that's how you get the calculation of Pasuk K and Pasuk Vav. But all these numbers here are confusing because Shvi, Asiri, Arba'im Yom are not counted from any calendar date or from the beginning of creation, but rather from the flood, and not from the beginning of the flood, but the end of the flood. Hopefully now all that makes a little bit more sense, or I've left you more confused. But if you chart it out on the calendar, it all works out. And I think makes a lot of sense. But either way, we're coming into the month right now of Cheshvan, where we're thinking a little bit about the beginning of the flood and getting into that period of time, which is, I guess, so appropriate that we have so much rain outside, introducing us to this month. And we'll see what happens on Shabbos, Parshas Noach. Usually it rains. We'll see what happens this year. Everybody have a great day.
Thanks very much,
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
You all have a good one.
You too.